Good morning again, Dr. James.
Good morning again, Aisha.
Many sectors are applauding what they consider a good budget, and we're going to get into the details of the budget. But to start off, I wanted to get your general overview on thoughts of Minister Tancoo's maiden presentation.
Well, it seems to me to be
What?
the first
What?
effort by
I'm
a
not hearing
government
him.
that is new. You still not hearing me?
Go ahead, Dr.
Hello?
James.
You hearing me now?
Go ahead.
Right. I think this is the first effort of a government that is new and that has not had the time to work through all of the essential details required to deal with the kind of economic crisis we have in Trinidad and in Tobago, in the country as a whole. So when I listened to the minister, I heard a perspective similar to the perspective Dr. Rowley had in 2015, that the past government was incompetent and wicked and so on, and brought the country to ruin. And it's the same narrative I'm hearing here. But what is required by a new government, as was required in 2015 from Rowley, was a proper assessment of why the last government failed. And in that context, why did Tobago collapse with the central government, with the economy in Trinidad? And so the budget fails, in my view, to capture that critical, essential issue, the answer to that critical question. But the government finds itself in a desperate position, similar to 1986 when Robinson took power, and it had to cook up a set of devices to address the shortage of foreign exchange, to address the tight budgetary circumstances, the great prospect that whatever you plan for on the revenue side will not be realized. And I think they tried, but there are fundamentals that are missing in my view.
All right, so Minister Tancoo presented a $59 billion package with a deficit of close to $4 billion. Now, the question is, when we looked at last year, 2025, the previous administration presented an almost same amount of budget. However, the deficit, according to the present administration, or the tentative deficit for 2025, comes in at almost $8 billion. What would be different in the upcoming fiscal year that would allow the deficit to be so reduced, even based on the fact that oil prices continue to be depressed?
Well, the government will have to be extremely lucky that the oil price targets that underlie the budget would be realized, and the gas price targets would also be realized, and that's a huge gamble. If they're not realized, then you have an additional, say, $2 billion shortfall coming from the energy sector. Instead of the 11.5 billion they anticipate, you might get nine, and the consequence of that would be that the government would find it difficult to keep a lot of the promises, the commitments that it has made, including this famous 10% to public servants,
Right,
because all
that
of
was
those
one
have
of
to
the
be
goodies
funded by
offered.
revenues.
Yes, that was one of the goodies offered yesterday. The other thing I
That's right.
noticed is the size of the non-oil revenue, which is targeting manufacturing and a number of other industries that the nation has. How robust do we think those industries will allow for them to reach their revenue target?
Well, all of them depend on the performance of the energy sector. Every other sector in the economy, with a modest exception for agriculture, very modest, depends heavily on access to foreign exchange to buy imports to run the operations. And if the primary source of foreign exchange fails us, which is what causes economic crisis in the country, then those sectors would also take a hit. And then those revenue targets would also not be realized. So everything is a big bet on oil and gas delivering those price targets that the Prime Minister, that the Minister of Finance has in the budget.
And is it only about price target, or is there any opportunity within the next fiscal year to increase production? I know right before the election they were talking about the OFAC license and getting the Dragon gas field on schedule, but I don't think within the next fiscal year that that increased production would be realized. Is there any other level of production that the nation could see increase that would allow for the government to realize the revenues that they're looking for?
Well, two comments on the Dragon deal story. That's been running hot and cold, right? Remember, the Prime Minister
Yes.
said it's dead, and then this recent round is, well, we got a license from the Americans, so we'll go ahead and implement it. We must not forget, as Dr. Rowley reminded us a couple of days ago, the Dragon field is in Venezuela. And you have to remember too that the Prime Minister has been quite strident in her statements about Venezuela, uh, and somewhat antagonistic to boot. So I don't know under what conditions Venezuela would agree to Trinidad and Tobago coming in to extract its gas because the Americans gave a license to come and negotiate or something like that. I don't know that Venezuela would be up to that kind of game at all. So, especially because they have their own international backing and can thumb their nose down on the Americans. So this is dicey stuff and not a great prospect for progress in my view.
Okay. Now, one of the things the finance minister mentioned, well, indicated in the budget, is that the medium-term framework that they plan to use for the next fiscal year, and I guess in the entire for the period of their administration, is the UNC Manifesto 2025. Now, I took a look at it last night, and it's quite long, but I know that you have delved into it, and I wanted to discuss using the manifesto as a medium-term framework and what your thoughts are on the information it provides in order for so that we have an idea of how the government plans to move ahead with the economy.
Right. Well, a couple of comments there. One is that it is generally not a good idea to use your manifesto as the medium term plan, because even though you won the election, that's your half of the country. And you shouldn't forget the experience of the PNM with the PNM's manifesto when Rowley took power in 2015. The idea that they started there and then they had to navigate to Vision 2030. Ultimately, though, you govern for the whole country. You can't govern for your half, and those who voted for you will not be sufficient to allow you to drive the economy onto a development pathway. So you really do need to sit down with the country and work out a medium to long term plan and build out your medium term expenditure framework from that. And then anchor your budget on something that you understand you can implement because the rest of the country will team up with you to implement it. So I have great doubt that use of a manifesto is a good planning tool. And I speak that way because I'm perhaps one of the few fully trained planners in the whole Caribbean. So I can tell you that that is not great strategy from the professional perspective. It may fit the needs of the political circumstances because the government is new and has not had time to work through these things. So you have to wing it on what you have until then. But if I were the government, I would hasten to put together a proper medium term policy framework in order to guide the country. And that requires real collaboration with the rest of the country to get that done properly.
Okay.
Now,
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
mhm.
Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
was just about to say that many of the things that the government has put into this budget is a reflection of what they campaigned for and what they promised in the manifesto. And I took a look at the pillars of the budget, and you could see in the pillars good political intention and good political navigation. But what you can't see is anything that goes to the fundamental reasons Dr. Rowley failed and the fundamental threat to the success of this government.
Okay, so in general, besides all the goodies that were offered in the budget, and they included quite a lot, the reduction of super by 1%, VAT removed on certain
$1.
items, not 1%, $1, sorry. VAT removed on certain items, the removal of CPEP and URP. I don't know if that's a goodie for Trinidad, but we'll put it there. The 10% offer to trade unions, additional subsidy on a 100-pound or larger cylinder LNG, the operationalization of the A&R airport, the drop in construction costs. Besides all those goodies, do you believe it's this pretty much the same old budget from, or not, of past administrations?
Well, the same general approach.
Yes.
It's, if you look carefully at the budget, there is one critical question it does not answer, and that is, how do we diversify the economy? And you can't answer that question until you know what's blocking the diversification.
Okay.
In that same context, you have to understand what's blocking development in Tobago, because it's the same problem. Tobago is not developing because the country is not diversifying. And Tobago cannot develop unless it succeeds, of course, until the country pays proper attention to the diversification needs. Now, the heart of the diversification agenda has to be the development of a strong export capacity in the professional services, in education and healthcare and the creative industries and financial services and housing related to all those kinds of programs. And if we look at our records, we would see that the more we bet on oil and gas, the more that bet puts up a roadblock in the way of the development of the exports of professional services.
Unless
so the
we
country
get some
has a
windfall
strategy.
sometime. Unless
Well,
we get
if you're lucky and your oil prices and gas prices triple, then you say money is no problem.
correct.
But if you're not lucky, as for the 7 decades I've seen the country work, every 5 to 10 years we've gotten into trouble. That's because although Trinidadians say God is a Trini, God not paying any attention. So every 5 to 10 years you get into trouble, and that is going to happen again and again until we learn to diversify the economy properly. And unless that happens, Tobago has nowhere to go. And that is the critical thing I see in this budget. There are other things, of course. There is no growth target. There is no interest rate target.
Correct.
All of the normal things you need for a proper budget there's no link between the industries that would deliver growth and the growth target. Stuff like that.
But Dr. James, do you think information like that will come out in the debate on Friday? Because, I mean, he had a 3-hour-long presentation, or a little more than 3 hour long, which, of course, could not entail everything. Do you think that the public would hear things like the growth rate, the projected growth rate, and things like that in the debate come this Friday?
Well, the manifesto doesn't have that. I know the manifesto very well because I studied it before the election in great detail. That growth target is not there. And the critical thing for the budgeting would be to be able to link the growth target to the development agenda, meaning how are we going to restructure the economy and which sectors will be the drivers of growth besides oil and gas. What the government has done over the decades is to bet on manufacturing of consumer durables. But anybody who understands how an economy develops will know that it is not consumer durables that will be the fundamental driver of your development for generally, and for Trinidad and Tobago. That's not where we are going to find our greatest export capability. It would be in the professional services for our country. And to the extent that that is not present in the manifesto and it's not present in the budget, so to say, I don't see how it would show up in the debates. And you have to have that information. That's not stuff you just pick up. You know, for decades, the country, from Eric Williams to now, the country has said, we'll educate our people. So a new campus is going to be activated in Debe to educate Trinidad and Tobagonians. UWI educates Trinidad and Tobagonians. UTT educates Trinidad and Tobagonians. But you need a different approach. So you have to go out and raise foreign investment, just like you do in oil and gas, to come in and help us build an education outflow to target American students. Now that's the same for healthcare and all of the other things. So if that perspective is not there, it won't show up in the debates. It wasn't there under the PNM. I didn't hear it in this budget because the information is fresh and new, and the government needs access to it. I don't think they have it. I don't think they have the data put together that way. And it would be good of the government to get access to the data. My team doing research here on behalf of the UN has it, and we're quite happy to share it with the government whenever it wants to receive it.
Okay. So the next direction I want to head is, where does Tobago fit? Last evening, the Office of the Chief Secretary indicated that the budget is a historic budget for Tobago, the largest allocation ever in the history of the Tobago House of Assembly, and the Chief Secretary, along with his Finance Secretary and his members, are pleased that this is a good start moving forward. So Tobago was able to get 5% of the national budget at $2.96 billion. They sent me yesterday that 2.742 billion will be allocated for recurrent, and 201 about their million will be allocated for the Tobago Development Program. Dr. James, of course, the number is larger than ever. Do you think this will redound to the benefit of Tobago, and how, especially as it relates to development?
Well, I'm a pretty old man now, and I have watched efforts to develop the Tobago economy over a long lifetime. And that includes the 45 years since the birth of the THA. And I have never seen success on that agenda. Just because Tobago is a government economy, it gets to generate larger outputs than it used to generate before the THA. But that's about it. There is no development going on, and there cannot be any development going on unless you alter the way the country makes policy and the way policy for Tobago integrates into policy for the country. Because the reason Tobago cannot develop and has not developed over 127 years is the same reason the country doesn't diversify. And the key to that is that the tourism sector cannot develop unless the professional services sector develops. We have a lot of evidence of that all across the Caribbean. That's what you see going on in the Bahamas. That's what's going on in St. Kitts Nevis. That's what's going on in the Cayman Islands, and so on. The reason Jamaica is not developing is because its professional services economy is not developing, and so on. So when you understand that, you could see that you could give Tobago more money. We had a lot more money after the THA was launched than we had before the THA was launched. It made no difference to the development of Tobago. And even if you doubled the budget of Tobago, as long as we don't change our approach to policy making at the level of the country, including the responsibility of the THA to tell the government in Trinidad and Tobago what the facts are, in the way I could extract the facts as a professional economist living here in Tobago, and share that with the country. Unless the THA is able to and willing to do that and smart enough to do that politically, government in Trinidad and Tobago will not really alter its preoccupation with oil and gas. And it's that sector over 70 years that has proven to be the barrier, the fundamental barrier, the policies of government that underlie its preoccupation with the oil and gas sector. Those policies are the policies that target education to the local industry, that target healthcare to the local economy, that target all of the tourism to the beach supply and so on. That same set of policies is why the economy is not diversifying and developing. So you could see where we are. We are in a position where lack of understanding of the nature of the economy and its development path is just simply creating high expectations. So Farley expects that because you get 2.9 billion, that will yield you better fruit. But that's just the expectation of an uninformed person about how the economy works. And the same is true for the minister. If you listen yesterday to the minister took a long time to clarify what went wrong, what Rowley did wrong in Trinidad. But he said not a word about what went wrong in Tobago and was quite satisfied to simply take up the mantra, the language offered by the THA, and repeat that. But that is not a responsible way to understand the problems we have, either in Trinidad or in Tobago. So I don't think that getting 2.9 billion, of which you are spending 2.7 billion on consumption and maintenance, and 200 million on development, promises Tobago to offer our great-grandchildren any better economy than what we are experiencing today. On top of that, Aisha, you have to remember this. The country has now made a policy to scrap CPEP and URP. Well, what does that mean in Tobago?
Well, the chief secretary said
68% of our
yesterday.
workers.
The chief
But
secretary
but
said
but let me
yesterday
point.
that there'll be the URP and CPEP will continue in Tobago. But go ahead, Dr.
But
James.
let me point out the real reason CPEP and URP is an issue, and is an issue in Trinidad as in Tobago, is that you have this huge pool of undereducated workers who are underemployed in these make-work programs. We pass our mouth on CPEP and URP, but the low-end clerical work in the government is in the same boat. For example, a large part of retail in the same boat, underemployed workers, workers working without adequate amounts of education and other forms of capital. And what that really says is you have to develop and diversify the economy to solve that problem. So the minister, the prime minister, and the minister of finances, we're going to create new jobs. But for that to work, you have to solve the diversification problem.
Understood.
And
And you
if the
answer.
country understands that, it understands why the plan with respect to CPAP and URP is just as relevant in Tobago as it is in Trinidad. You may get votes if you keep them employed, but Tobago will still not develop.
And well, you answered my next question, because I was going to ask you, in the absence of a national policy as it relates to diversification and development, can you see any way that Tobago can use the additional funding to move forward? But you are saying even with the additional funding, in the absence of a national policy related to diversification and development, the island cannot move forward, or the nation cannot move forward.
And not just a national policy, a sound one, a proper
Okay.
one rooted in a proper understanding of why for 127 years Tobago has not developed.
Okay.